Redditor 1. I've never written this down before. Strange how your fingers can tremble just from typing words on a screen. But here I am, heart racing like I'm 13 again, standing on that corner in the suburbs, staring up at something that shouldn't exist. The memories come in fragments now, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that don't quite fit together. I remember the humidity of that summer night, the way my t-shirt clung to my back as Jake, Tommy, and I crept out of my bedroom window just after midnight. We were supposed to be meeting some girls from the next block, Sarah's house, I think. Stupid middle school drama that seemed so important at the time. The street lights cast orange pools on the sidewalk, and the cicadas were singing their summer song. Everything was normal until it wasn't. We rounded the corner onto Maple Street. At least, I think it was Maple. I've changed the names because even now, 25 years later, my palms get sweaty thinking about being too specific. That's when we saw it. Have you ever had a moment where your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing? Where reality splits open like a rotten fruit, showing you something that couldn't exist? The thing hanging in the sky that night was like that. Black against black, but somehow visible, like a hole cut out of the stars. It was massive, the size of 4, maybe 5 football fields across, the Hindenburg times 10. But it wasn't a blimp, despite what my mind desperately tried to tell me. Blimps don't hover in absolute silence. They don't absorb light like a black mirror. "Do you guys see that?" Tommy whispered, his voice cracking. We all nodded, necks craned upward, feet rooted to the concrete like we'd grown into it. "What the fuck is it?" Jake's question hung in the air, unanswered. Here's where the memory gets tricky, where the puzzle pieces don't line up. I remember staring up at that impossible shape, and then nothing. A gap, a blank space where time should be. The next clear memory is of something else in the sky. A glowing white object, like a barbell or a dumbbell, trailing wisps of smoke as it descended somewhere beyond the houses. The screech of tires brought us back to Earth. 2 black trucks, they look like F-150s but newer, sleeker, with strange silver boxes mounted in their beds, tore down our residential street, doing at least 70 DAs. The sound of their engines faded, but the silence they left behind felt wrong somehow, charged with something I couldn't name. When we finally started walking again, the sky was lightening in the east. 5 a.m., maybe 6. We'd lost hours, but none of us mentioned it. We went to Jake's house, crawled into our sleeping bags, and made a pact to tell my dad in the morning. He worked for the city, had connections. We never did. The strange thing is what happened after. Or rather, what didn't happen. No news reports, no viral videos, no conspiracy theories on local message boards. In a suburb of a major city, with hundreds of houses in view of that thing, we were supposedly the only ones who saw it? The math doesn't add up. Tommy moved away a few years later. I haven't heard from him since. Jake and I stayed friends through high school, but there was always something between us after that night, a weight in every conversation. We'd catch each other's eyes sometimes, start to say something, then look away. Even now, we're connected on Facebook, but our interactions are surface level. "Happy birthday, congrats on the new job," never anything real. I've thought about hypnosis over the years. There's specialists who deal with this sort of thing, who claim they can recover lost time. But what if what's in those missing hours is worse than not knowing? What if my mind locked those memories away for a reason? The thing that keeps me up at night isn't the craft itself, though God knows I've spent enough sleepless hours trying to make sense of what we saw. It's the silence afterward. The collective amnesia that fell over our community like a heavy blanket. Sometimes I'll be scrolling through local history Facebook groups or reading comments on articles about UFO sightings, hoping to find someone else who remembers, someone else who was awake that night, who looked up and saw reality tear itself apart. But no one ever mentions it, and that scares me more than anything, the idea that there are others out there, carrying the same memories, all of us choosing to forget, all of us pretending that nothing happened on that summer night, when something impossible cast its shadow over our neighborhood. Last week, I drove through the old neighborhood. The street corner is still there, unchanged. As I idled at the stop sign, I found myself looking up at the night sky. The stars winked back, innocent and ordinary. But for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something move against that backdrop of stars. Something dark, something silent, something waiting. I didn't stay to get a better look. Some memories are better left buried, some questions better left unasked. But I know what I saw that night 25 years ago, and I know I'm not the only one who remembers, even if we've all made an unspoken agreement to forget. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear the distant sound of trucks racing down a quiet street, and my heart will skip a beat. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, something huge and dark and impossible, but when I turn to look, it's gone. And sometimes, in my dreams, I remember what happened in those missing hours, but when I wake up, the memories slip away like smoke, leaving nothing behind but a lingering sense of dread and the taste of copper in my mouth. I'm writing this now because I can't carry it alone anymore. Maybe someone else who was there that night will read this and remember. Maybe they'll reach out, break this conspiracy of silence we've all been part of for so long. Or maybe they won't. Maybe we'll all keep pretending, keep living our lives as if nothing happened, as if we never saw what we saw. But I know what I saw, and somewhere out there in the vast darkness between the stars, something knows that I remember. Something is watching, waiting, wondering if I'll ever tell the whole truth about what happened in those missing hours. Some nights I think I hear it calling, a whisper just below the threshold of hearing, asking me to look up, to remember, to finally understand. I won't. Some doors are better left closed, some memories better left buried. But I needed to write this down, to make it real, to prove to myself that it wasn't just a dream. And if you're reading this, and if you remember too, know that you're not alone. We're all out here, carrying pieces of that night, pretending we don't see the shadows moving against the stars. Redditor 2. I've been having that dream again, the one where I'm floating, weightless, through an endless corridor of light. Sometimes I wake up screaming, other times in cold sweat, but mostly I just lie there, staring at the ceiling until dawn breaks. My husband says I should see someone about it, but how do you explain to a therapist that your best friend from high school might actually be right about the aliens? It started in the summer of 1985. Lisa and I were 16, spending another mundane Friday night on the roof of her parents' ranch-style house in suburban Ohio. We'd climb out her bedroom window, carefully navigating the gentle slope until we reached the flat portion near the chimney. It was our escape, our private sanctuary where we'd share secrets, dream about boys, and watch the stars emerge one by one in the deepening twilight. That night was different. The air felt charged, almost electric, like the moments before a thunderstorm. But the sky was clear, moonless, with stars scattered across the darkness like diamond dust. Lisa was in the middle of telling me about Tommy Peterson asking her to the homecoming dance when we saw it. The light appeared suddenly, hovering above the Thompsons' house across the street. At first, I thought it was a helicopter, but there was no sound, just this brilliant, pulsing light that seemed to reach into my mind, making everything fuzzy around the edges. "Do you see that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. I tried to respond, but my tongue felt thick, uncooperative. The light grew brighter, expanding until it filled my entire field of vision. Then, nothing. The next thing I remember, we were still on the roof, but something was wrong. The stars had shifted positions dramatically, and there was a deep chill in the air that hadn't been there before. My watch, a Sweet 16 present from my parents, showed 1:47 a.m. 3 hours had vanished into thin air. "Lisa?" My voice cracked as I turned to her. She was hugging her knees to her chest, rocking slightly back and forth. Her face was pale, almost ghostly in the starlight. "We should go inside," she said flatly, already crawling toward her bedroom window. I followed, my movements mechanical, like I was operating my body from a distance. Over the next few weeks, I tried to talk to her about that night. Each time, she'd shut down completely. "I don't know," she'd mumble, suddenly becoming intensely interested in her math homework or the latest issue of 17 magazine. "Just drop it, okay?" 2 months later, my dad got transferred to Michigan, and I lost touch with Lisa. This was before cell phones and social media made staying connected effortless. We exchanged a few letters at first, but they gradually stopped coming. Life moved on, or at least I thought it did. The nightmares started about a year after that night. Always the same, the corridor of light, the sensation of floating, and voices speaking in a language that seemed to bypass my ears and go straight to my brain. I'd wake up with my heart racing, convinced that the shadows in my room were moving, watching, waiting. 10 years passed before I saw Lisa again. I was back in Ohio for a work conference and decided to look her up. She was still living in our hometown, working as a kindergarten teacher. We met at a small coffee shop downtown, and from the moment she walked in, I knew something was different. The Lisa I remembered was always animated, full of energy and sass. This Lisa moved like she was underwater, her movements slow and deliberate. Her eyes had a distant, dreamy quality, and she smiled constantly. Not the genuine smile I remembered, but something eerier, like she was privy to some cosmic joke the rest of us couldn't understand. "I've been waiting for you to come back," she said before I could even say hello. "They told me you would." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "They are friends," she said simply, still wearing that serene smile. "The ones from that night on the roof. They visited me many times since then. At first it was scary, the tests, the probing, the questions they didn't need to speak aloud. But now I understand so much more." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Lisa, what are you talking about?" She leaned forward, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "I remember everything now. That first night, they took us both. They were curious about us, about humans. They did tests, collected samples. But they saw something in me that interested them more. They came back for me 3 more times after that." My hands were shaking so badly I had to set my cup down. I don't remember any of that." "They made sure you wouldn't," she said softly. "They knew you weren't ready, but they visited you again, you know, once more, after that first time. They told me about it." A memory surfaced. Not a nightmare this time, but something more tangible. A night during my senior year when I woke up with unexplained bruises on my arms and a splitting headache. My bedroom window had been open, even though I distinctly remembered closing it before bed. "They've told me so many things," Lisa continued, her voice taking on that dreamy quality again. "About the universe, about Earth, about what's coming. They showed me the truth about everything." She paused, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "They told me about your baby, too." "Baby?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine. "The one you'll lose next year. They tried to prevent it, but some things can't be changed. I'm so sorry." Her eyes welled with tears, but that peaceful smile never wavered. I yanked my hand away, standing up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several other customers turned to look at us. "You're crazy," I whispered. "This is crazy." But 11 months later, when the doctor confirmed my pregnancy, Lisa's words came rushing back. And when I lost the baby at 5 months, a stillbirth, just as she'd said, I spent 3 days in bed, alternating between sobbing and staring blankly at the ceiling, remembering her words. They tried to prevent it, but some things can't be changed. And that was 15 years ago. I've seen Lisa a handful of times since then, always briefly, always by chance when I'm visiting family back in Ohio. She's married now, teaches 2nd grade instead of kindergarten, and seems to live a perfectly normal life. She doesn't belong to any UFO groups or wear tinfoil hats. The only hint of anything unusual is that same dreamy smile, that same sense of profound peace that seems to radiate from her. The last time I saw her was 6 months ago. We ran into each other at the grocery store, and she hugged me like no time had passed. As we were saying goodbye, she touched my arm and said, "It's almost time, you know, for you to understand everything." "What does that mean?" I asked, but she just smiled and walked away. Last night, I had the dream again, but this time it was different. This time I understood the voices, and when I woke up, I was smiling. I think I need to go back to Ohio. I think it's time to talk to Lisa again, because now I remember everything too. Redditor 3. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. The memories are fractured, like shards of a broken mirror, each piece reflecting something I can't or won't fully comprehend. It was supposed to be a routine drive home from Indiana University. 2 hours of mindless highway driving, nothing more. I left Bloomington around 10 p.m., my old Honda Civic humming contentedly as I merged onto the interstate. The radio kept me company, some late-night talk show host droning on about conspiracy theories. I remember thinking how ridiculous it all sounded. The traffic thinned out as I got further from the city, until I was practically alone on two-lane highway. My headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating empty fields on either side. The harvest was over, leaving behind countless rows of dried corn stalks that looked like skeletal fingers reaching up from the earth. At exactly 10:53 p.m., I remember checking my phone at a stoplight just before I noticed flashing lights in my rearview mirror, red and blue, the universal signal to pull over. I muttered a curse under my breath, already calculating how much this ticket would set me back. There was a side road coming up, Cedar Tree Road, so I signaled and turned off. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled to a stop. I reached for my glove compartment, fishing for my registration and insurance papers. That's when I realized something was wrong. The flashing lights had vanished. No patrol car passed by. No flashlight beam tapped against my window. Just darkness and silence. Then my car went haywire. The radio started cycling through stations on its own, a cacophony of voices and static. The volume jumped up and down, making me flinch. My dome light began to flicker like a strobe, and the headlights followed suit, turning the corn stalks into dancing shadows. The dashboard clock read 10:56 p.m. Battery's dying, I told myself, trying to stay calm. Just a short in the system. I leaned forward to pop the hood, and that's where my memory turns to static, like a TV channel going off air. The next thing I remember is stars. Thousands of them, more than I'd ever seen before, sprawled across the black canvas of the sky like scattered diamonds. They seemed impossibly close, as if I could reach up and pluck them from the heavens. The cold hit me next, a bone-deep chill that made me realize I was lying on bare earth. I sat up, my head spinning, and found myself surrounded by corn stalks, not just a few rows in, but deep in the middle of a harvested field. The stalks stretched out in every direction, a maze of agricultural debris. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of what looked like highway lights. My throat felt raw, as if I'd been screaming. My clothes were damp with dew and my shoes were caked with mud. How long had I been out here? Where was my car? The questions tumbled through my mind, each one bringing fresh waves of panic. I stood on shaky legs and started walking toward the distant lights. The corn stalks whispered against each other in the night breeze, a sound that normally wouldn't bother me but now sent shivers down my spine. Every few steps I'd look over my shoulder, convinced I heard footsteps behind me, but there was never anything there. Or at least, nothing I could see. When I finally reached a road intersection, the signs read 350E and 50W. I was half a mile from where I'd pulled over, half a mile through fields in the dark, with no memory of how I got there. The walk back to my car felt like an eternity. Every sound made me jump. The rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, the wind through the trees. But worse than the sounds were the moments of complete silence, when it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, a dark shape against the starlit sky. The battery was dead. All the lights I'd seen going crazy must have drained it. I climbed inside, hands shaking as I reached for my phone on the passenger seat. 2:17 a.m. More than 3 hours had vanished into the night. 3 hours I couldn't account for. 3 hours that left me with nothing but mud-caked shoes and a growing sense of dread. I sat there for 30 minutes, trying to make sense of it all. The flashing lights that weren't police, the electrical malfunction, the missing time, the field. None of it added up to anything my rational mind could accept. When I finally called AAA, my voice sounded strange to my own ears. The operator asked if I was okay. I must have sounded as shaken as I felt. It took them an hour to reach me, during which time I didn't dare leave my car. I kept the doors locked, even though I knew, somehow, that locks wouldn't matter if they came back. The AAA guy was chatty as he hooked up the jumper cables, asking what I was doing out here so late. I fed him some story about getting lost, but I could tell he didn't buy it. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I signed his paperwork. That was 3 months ago. I've only told one person, my uncle, and even he looked at me like I was losing my mind. I get it. It sounds like every cliché abduction story ever told. If someone came to me with this story, I'd probably think they were making it up or had some kind of breakdown. But I know what I experienced, even if I can't remember all of it. Sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses in my dreams. Bright lights, strange sounds, a sensation of floating. I wake up with my heart racing and the taste of copper in my mouth. I don't take that route home anymore. I add an hour to my drive just to avoid that stretch of two-lane highway. And every time I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror, my blood runs cold, because now I know, sometimes, it's not the police behind you. Sometimes, it's something else entirely. Something that can take 3 hours of your life and leave you with nothing but questions and a fear of the night sky. I still check my GPS obsessively when I drive at night, marking my location every few minutes. I keep a dash cam running, though part of me knows it wouldn't matter. They, whatever they are, can apparently mess with electronics at will. The rational part of my mind tries to explain it away. Maybe I had some kind of seizure. Maybe I sleepwalked. Maybe I had a panic attack and blacked out. But none of those explanations account for the distance I traveled, or the mud on my shoes, or the way my watch stopped at exactly 10:56 p.m. that night and never worked again. All I know is that something happened to me on that dark stretch of highway. Something I can't explain, something I can't prove, something I can't forget. And sometimes, when I look up at the stars, I can't shake the feeling that they're looking back. Redditor 4. The smoke was different that day. After 15 years of fighting wildfires, you learn to read smoke like others read weather patterns. But this was wrong. I was manning Engine 47, leading our 4-truck convoy through the Utah desert just south of Dugway. The summer heat had been brutal, turning the landscape into a tinderbox that needed just one spark to ignite. But that wasn't what was bothering me. Something about the dispatch had felt off from the start, too urgent for a routine brush fire, too vague on the details. The radio crackled with static every few minutes, which wasn't unusual in these remote areas. What was unusual were the choppers. They appeared on the horizon like black arrows against the burnt orange sky. 8 of them, flying in perfect formation. Military birds, definitely. We'd worked near Dugway enough times to know their patterns, but this was different. They weren't just passing by, they were pacing us. Probably running drills, Martinez said from the passenger seat, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The helicopters maintained their position above us for 10 miles, matching our speed exactly, no variation, no breaks in formation, just steady, precise movement that made the hair on my neck stand up. The sun was starting to set when we reached our designated staging area. The choppers peeled away without warning, disappearing behind the mountains. The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with something I couldn't name. We started unloading our gear, the familiar routine of checking equipment providing some comfort against the growing unease in my gut. "Allah, lead to all units. Prepare for ground assault on the eastern flank," I said into the radio, watching my crew shoulder their packs. The fire didn't look that bad from our position, just some smoke rising from behind a ridge about a mile out. Standard procedure: hike in, establish a line, contain and control. That's when everything went sideways. The sound hit us first, a deep, resonant boom that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then we saw it, a perfectly vertical column of smoke shooting into the sky like a reverse waterfall. It had to be at least 200 feet high, but it didn't spread or dissipate like normal smoke. It just hung there, defying physics and everything I knew about fire behavior. The concussion wave hit us seconds later. Even at a mile away, it nearly knocked Martinez off his feet. My ears popped, and I tasted copper in my mouth. The noise that followed wasn't like any explosion I'd ever heard. It was almost musical, a deep thrumming that made my molars ache. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted, but I was already reaching for the radio. Before I could key up, we saw it. The aircraft, if you could call it that, emerged from behind the smoke column. It moved with impossible grace for something its size, gliding through the air like a manta ray through water. The thing was massive, easily larger than our biggest tanker planes, but completely silent. Its surface was a black so deep it seemed to absorb the fading sunlight. The overall shape was roughly rectangular but organic somehow, with curves and protrusions that didn't match any aircraft I'd ever seen or heard of. The underside had what looked like wells or ports, glowing with a faint bluish light that left after images in my vision. Time seemed to stop as it passed overhead, no more than 500 feet above us. The air temperature dropped noticeably, and all of our radios emitted a high-pitched whine. I found myself holding my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thing was straight out of a science fiction movie, like someone had taken the Batmobile and turned it into a stealth bomber. As it disappeared behind the ridge, our radios suddenly crackled to life. The voice that came through was clipped, professional, and brooked no argument. "All fire units in Grid 7 Alpha, this is Dugway Control. You are ordered to evacuate the area immediately. Confirm receipt and begin immediate withdrawal." Martinez looked at me, his face pale in the growing darkness. "Sir?" I keyed my radio. "This is Alpha Lead. We have a crew of 16 on scene. Request clarification on..." "Negative, Alpha Lead. Evacuate immediately. This is a direct order." Our incident commander's voice cut in. "All units, this is command. Fall back to secondary staging area Charlie. New assignment incoming." He sounded stressed, which was not like him at all. We packed up in record time, everyone moving with an urgency born of more than just military orders. The thing we'd seen, whatever it was, had triggered something primitive in our brains, something that recognized we were no longer at the top of the food chain. They sent us to a mop-up operation 100 miles south, a milk run if I ever saw one. The fire was already contained, just some hot spots that needed watching. Busy work to keep us occupied and, more importantly, away. That night, huddled around our small camp stove, nobody talked about what we'd seen. But we all felt it. The weight of something bigger than us. Something that defied explanation. The incident commander never filed a report about the evacuation, and when I checked later, there was no record of us ever being dispatched to Dugway that day. I've spent countless nights since then trying to make sense of it all. If it was classified military tech, why didn't they secure the area beforehand? Why let us get close enough to see? And that smoke column, I've been working fires my whole adult life, and I've never seen anything behave like that. Sometimes, on long night shifts, I'll catch Martinez staring at the sky. We don't talk about it, but I know he's looking for that impossible aircraft, that silent shadow that challenged everything we thought we knew. The official story is that we were redirected due to priority needs, but we both know better. There are things out there, things our minds can't quite grasp. I've made peace with not knowing the full truth, but I'll never forget the day the sky turned wrong and the desert held secrets too big for us to comprehend. Last week, I was working a small brush fire near Cedar City when I saw a familiar formation of black helicopters on the horizon. I immediately called my crew back to the trucks. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is know when to walk away. Because out here, in the vast empty spaces where the desert meets the sky, there are some fires that aren't meant to be fought. Redditor 5. I've never told many people this story. Not the whole truth of it anyway. Most folks just get that sanitized version about the UFO my mom and I saw that sunny afternoon driving back from Aunt Sarah's. The one where we spotted a classic silver saucer, watched it vanish, and that was that. A neat little anecdote that people can laugh off or explain away with weather balloons and atmospheric anomalies. But that's not the whole story, not even close. It was August 15th, one of those late summer days where the heat sits heavy on your shoulders, and the AC in Mom's old Camry was struggling to keep up. We'd left Aunt Sarah's place around 3 p.m. after the usual Sunday lunch. Mom was behind the wheel, and I was slouched in the passenger seat, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The radio was playing some soft rock station, turned down low enough that it was more background hum than actual music. The two-lane highway cutting through the cornfields was practically empty. We'd only passed maybe 2 other cars in the last 20 minutes. I remember checking the time, 3:47 p.m., because I was calculating how long until we'd be home. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a reflection on my phone screen, a bright spot that made me squint. But when I looked up, there it was, a metallic disc hanging in the cloudless blue sky, maybe a few hundred feet up and slightly to our left. The sun was hitting it just right, making it gleam like polished chrome. "Mom," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Do you see that?" She was already slowing the car down, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Yeah, honey, I see it." The object was massive, bigger than any aircraft I'd ever seen. It had to be at least the size of a football field. Yet it hung there, utterly silent, defying everything I knew about physics. The classic saucer shape was unmistakable, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but seeing it in broad daylight made it feel surreal, almost obscene. That's when things started getting weird. The air in the car seemed to thicken, like we were suddenly underwater. The radio started crackling, spitting out bursts of static between fragments of songs. My phone's screen went black, then started rapidly cycling through apps before shutting down completely. "Maybe we should pull over," Mom suggested, but her foot was already easing off the gas. The car rolled to a stop right there in the middle of the empty highway. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind in the corn, no distant traffic, not even the tick of the car's cooling engine, just dead silence and that impossible object hanging in the sky. Then we saw it, the thing that I've spent years trying to rationalize away. The UFO didn't just disappear. It unraveled. Like someone pulling a loose thread from a sweater, it began to come apart in strips that curled away into nothing. But as it disintegrated, something else became visible behind it. Through the gaps in its dissolving structure, I could see things. Shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. Geometries that shouldn't exist in our three-dimensional world. And faces, God, the faces. They were pressed against whatever membrane separated their reality from ours, distorting like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, all staring down at us with eyes that weren't eyes at all, but rather endless black spirals that seemed to pull at something deep inside my mind. Mom screamed. I know she did because I felt her hand grab my arm, her nails digging in hard enough to leave marks that I'd find later. But I couldn't hear her. The silence had become something physical, pressing against my eardrums until I thought they might burst. The last piece of the UFO dissolved, and for one eternal moment, we were looking directly into somewhere else, a place that our minds weren't equipped to process. I remember colors that don't exist, structures that folded in on themselves infinitely, and movement that happened in more directions than should be possible. Then, like a rubber band snapping back into place, reality reasserted itself. The UFO was gone. The silence broke. The radio came back on, playing Hotel California like nothing had happened. My phone rebooted, showing 3:48 p.m. Only a minute had passed. Mom and I sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking. Finally, she put the car in drive, and we continued home. We talked about it that evening, comparing notes, confirming that we'd both seen the same impossible things. But as the days passed, we spoke about it less and less. It was easier to focus on the simple version, just another UFO sighting in Middle America. But things changed after that day, small things at first. Mom started covering all the mirrors in the house at night. I developed an intense fear of geometric patterns, especially spirals. We both began having the same dream, standing in a cornfield under a sky full of holes, while something vast and patient watched us through the gaps between stars. The dreams got worse over time, more detailed, more interactive. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I haven't been outside. Mom's started sleeping with the lights on, saying she can't stand the dark anymore because the shadows move wrong. Last week, I found a note in my jacket pocket. I don't remember writing it, but it's definitely my handwriting. It just says, "They're still watching. They never stopped." The thing is, I know it's true. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of those impossible geometries folding through the air. When I look in mirrors, the reflection takes just a fraction of a second too long to move. And late at night, when everything is quiet, I can feel that same thick silence starting to creep in around the edges of reality. I still tell people the simple version of our UFO story. It's easier that way. They can laugh it off, make their jokes about swamp gas and weather balloons. But Mom and I know the truth. We didn't just see something that day. Something saw us. And whatever it was, wherever it came from, it's not finished with us yet. Sometimes, on clear days, when the sun is bright and the sky is that perfect, empty blue, I find myself looking up, searching for any sign of that metallic disk, not because I want to see it again. God, no. But because I need to know where it is. Because the only thing worse than seeing it again would be not seeing it until it's too late. The doctors say Mom's episodes are just anxiety attacks. They've prescribed her medication, recommended therapy. They don't understand that her insistence on checking the sky every hour isn't paranoia, it's survival instinct. Because we both know that somewhere, in the spaces between what we can see and what we can comprehend, something is watching, waiting. And someday it's going to do more than just look. I still have that note. I keep it in my wallet now, not because I need the reminder I couldn't forget if I tried, but because sometimes, late at night, when the silence gets too thick and the shadows move wrong, it helps to know I'm not crazy. That somewhere out there, folded into dimensions we were never meant to see, something impossible is studying us through holes in reality. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I'm finally writing this all down. Not because I expect anyone to believe the real story, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that what we saw that day wasn't just a UFO. It was a tear in the fabric of our world. And through that tear, we caught a glimpse of something vast and patient and hungry. So the next time you're driving down a quiet highway on a sunny afternoon and you see something strange in the sky, don't stop. Don't look too closely. And whatever you do, don't wait around to see what happens when it starts to come apart. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. Redditor 6. I used to spend a lot of time stargazing at my grandmother's farmhouse in rural Montana. The isolation never bothered me back then. There was something comforting about being alone under that vast expanse of stars, watching satellites trace their predictable paths across the night sky. I'd gotten pretty good at spotting them, those steady pinpricks of light making their patient journey from horizon to horizon. That was before the night everything changed. Before I learned that some things in the sky don't follow the rules we think they do. It was late October, around 2 a.m. The air had that particular bite to it that comes with autumn in farm country, and the darkness was absolute. No streetlights for miles, and the moon was just a sliver, barely enough to cast shadows. I was wrapped in my usual army surplus blanket, settled into the old wooden chair on the back porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. I'd already counted 3 satellites that night, marking their steady progress across the black canvas above. The 4th one caught my eye coming in from the west, moving with that familiar, measured pace. I remember thinking how clear the viewing was that night, probably because of the cold front that had moved through earlier, sweeping away any hint of clouds or haze. Then it happened. The light stopped, just stopped dead in its tracks. My breath caught in my throat. Satellites don't stop. They can't stop. It's basic physics. Objects in orbit maintain their velocity. I'd been watching these things since I was 12 years old, and never, not once, had I seen anything like this. For 3 heartbeats, that point of light hung there, motionless against the backdrop of stars. Then, God, I still get chills thinking about it, it changed direction. Not gradually, not in an arc, but in a sharp, impossible 45-degree angle, shooting off to the northeast faster than anything I'd ever seen in the sky. The light intensified for a fraction of a second, a brilliant flash that left an afterimage burned into my retinas. then vanished completely. I sat there for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the arms of that wooden chair so tight my knuckles ached. The rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it. A meteor, maybe, or some atmospheric phenomenon I'd never heard of? But deep down, in that primitive part of our minds that knows when something is fundamentally wrong, I understood I'd witnessed something that shouldn't exist. The silence that followed seemed different somehow, heavier. The darkness between the stars looked deeper, as if it was watching back. I finally forced myself to go inside when my teeth started chattering, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or fear. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, alternating between trying to convince myself I'd imagined it and knowing with absolute certainty that I hadn't. The next morning, I started researching. I dove into astronomical forums, scientific papers, anything I could find about unusual aerial phenomena. Most of what I found was easily dismissible. Lens flares, weather balloons, the usual explanations. But buried in those forums, I found others who'd seen the same thing. Their descriptions matched mine exactly. The sudden stop, the sharp angle change, the flash before disappearance. One account in particular haunted me. A former air traffic controller described watching something similar on radar, something that performed maneuvers that should have torn any aircraft apart. The thread was deleted the next day, but I'd saved screenshots. I started collecting these stories, building a digital archive of impossible observations. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back to my grandmother's farm since that night. But something strange has started happening at my apartment in the city. Every night, at exactly 2 a.m., the same time I saw that light in the sky, my electronics go haywire. My phone loses signal, my Wi-Fi drops out, and my TV screen fills with static. It lasts for exactly 3 minutes, the same amount of time I spent watching that light before it vanished. Last night, I broke down and set up a camera pointing at the sky outside my window. This morning, reviewing the footage, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At exactly 2 a.m., for just one frame, there was a bright point of light directly above my building. When I zoomed in on that frame, I could make out something else, a shadow cast on my window in the shape of what looked like a hand. But the proportions were wrong, the fingers too long and jointed in places fingers shouldn't bend. I've tried telling myself it's all connected to that meteor theory. Objects hitting the atmosphere at steep angles, skipping back out into space. The physics almost make sense if you squint at them hard enough. But then I remember that hand shadow, and I know deep down that I'm lying to myself. Tonight, I'm going to sit on my balcony and watch the sky again. I know it's probably stupid, but I need to know. The thing is, I'm not sure what scares me more, seeing that light again or the growing certainty that this time, it might be watching for me. My phone is charged, my camera is set up, and it's 1:57 a.m. now. The city lights wash out most of the stars, but between them, the darkness seems to pulse with anticipation. 3 minutes until 2 a.m. 3 minutes until... Wait, something's moving up there. And this time I don't think it's going to pass me by. Redditor 7. I've never told anyone this before, but I think I'm being watched. Not in the usual paranoid way people sometimes feel. This is different. I know because it started with my grandfather, then my father, and now me. 3 generations of witnesses to something impossible. The corner store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I grabbed a carton of milk. My phone showed 11:47 p.m., and my credit card balance reminded me I really shouldn't be spending even these few dollars. But sleep had been elusive lately, and warm milk was my grandmother's remedy for everything. The bell chimed as I pushed through the door into the autumn night. The parking lot was empty except for my beat-up Honda Civic and a sleek black car I hadn't noticed before. Something about it seemed wrong. There was no steam rising from its exhaust, despite the cold, no gentle engine rumble. Just perfect, gleaming darkness. I quickened my pace, fumbling with my keys. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. My throat tightened as I heard dress shoes clicking against asphalt. Precise, measured steps, approaching from behind. "Excuse me, Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was pleasant, almost artificially so. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. A tall man in an impeccable black suit stood there, his blonde hair catching what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. He wore sunglasses, despite the late hour, and his smile was too wide, too perfect, like someone who had studied human expressions but never quite mastered them. "How do you know my name?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I knew your father, James, and your grandfather, Robert." His head tilted slightly, the movement too smooth to be natural. "They both had interesting stories to tell." My blood ran cold. Dad had told me about the strange man who visited him in the summer of '73, and how Mom had seen the same figure decades later. But I'd always assumed it was just another rural legend, like the lights they used to watch dance across the Illinois sky. "What do you want?" His smile widened fractionally. "Just to ask a few questions. Have you experienced anything unusual lately?" The milk carton was cold against my palm as I remembered last week's incident, the localized earthquake that shook only my house, the orb of light that hovered outside my bedroom window, the strange gaps in my memory. "No," I lied. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Are you certain? We've been monitoring your family for quite some time. Your lineage is unique." I took a step backward, my shoes squeaking against the wet pavement. "I need to go." "Of course." He reached into his suit jacket and produced a pristine white business card. "When you're ready to discuss what you've seen, what you've experienced, we'll be waiting." My fingers trembled as I took the card. It was blank, except for a single black symbol I'd seen before, in my grandfather's old journals, in my father's sketches, in my own recurring dreams. The man turned and walked back to his car with that same unnaturally fluid movement. The vehicle made no sound as it pulled away, leaving me alone in the dark parking lot with my rapidly warming milk and a card that seemed to pulse faintly in my palm. That was 3 days ago. I've been trying to convince myself it was just stress, lack of sleep, and overactive imagination fed by too many family stories. But things have gotten stranger since then. My phone doesn't hold a charge anymore. The lights in my apartment flicker in patterns that seem almost like code. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a mirror or window, I swear my eyes look different, just for a moment, just long enough to make me doubt my own sanity. Last night, I finally worked up the courage to call my dad. Before I could even mention the man in the suit, he interrupted me with 2 questions. "Did he give you a card? Did you keep it?" When I said yes to both, the line went silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then he spoke in a whisper I'd never heard from him before. "Burn it. Now. And Sarah, don't look up at the sky tonight. Promise me." I didn't burn the card. Instead, I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened next. The symbol on the card has started to change, revealing new patterns, new meanings. I can read them now, though I don't know how. They're coordinates, dates, frequencies, a history of my family's involvement in something vast and impossible. The sun set an hour ago. Through my window, I can see lights gathering in the sky. Not stars, not planes, not anything that should exist in our reality. My phone is dead, but the blank screen keeps showing my reflection. My eyes aren't my own anymore. The doorbell just rang. Through the peephole, I can see a tall figure in a black suit, smiling that perfect smile. But he's not alone this time. There are others with him, faces I recognize from old family photos, relatives who disappeared years ago. They're all smiling the same smile. I know I should run. Every instinct screams for me to hide, to call for help, to wake up from this nightmare. But the card in my hand pulses stronger now, and the symbol seems to whisper promises of answers. About my family, about the lights in the sky, about what we really are. My hand is reaching for the doorknob. The metal is ice cold against my skin, and I can hear them breathing on the other side. Perfect, synchronized breaths that sound nothing like human respiration. I should be terrified, but all I feel is a strange sense of coming home. I'm gonna open the door now. I don't know if I'll ever write another word after this, but at least you'll know why I disappeared. If you ever meet a tall man in a black suit with a too perfect smile, run. Don't take his card, don't look into his eyes, and whatever you do, don't look up at the sky. But if you're from my family, if you've seen the lights and felt the earth shake and known, somehow, that you were different, then maybe you'll understand why I'm turning the handle. Maybe you'll even find this story years from now when they come for you too. The door is opening, they're still smiling, and now finally I understand why. Redditor 8. The first time I saw them, I was just a kid counting stars in Houston. Back then, everything seemed simpler. Even that strange light hovering over the tree line didn't frighten me. I wish I could go back to that innocence, before I knew what was really out there, before they started watching me. It wasn't until 15 years later, in Tuscaloosa, that my real nightmare began. I'd been staying at my buddy Mike's place in one of those cookie-cutter garden home communities, you know the type, where every house looks like it was stamped out of the same mold. The kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happens. At least, that's what I used to think. I remember checking my phone as I stepped outside for a smoke. 4 a.m. exactly. The night was crystal clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a peculiar flash in my peripheral vision, but when I turned my head, my heart nearly stopped. Hovering there, maybe 400 yards away, was something that shouldn't exist. The lights, God, those lights. Blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, all strobing and pulsing in patterns that made my eyes hurt. It moved silently, like a ghost ship sailing through the night sky. As it passed in front of the moon, I could finally make out its shape, like a teardrop, or maybe a sunflower seed, but wrong somehow. The lights seemed to be broadcasting upward, creating an otherworldly aurora above the craft. Behind it trailed a thin line of dark exhaust that dissipated about 50 feet back, like a pencil drawing being slowly erased. I ran inside to grab Mike, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the doorknob. By the time we got back out, it was just a distant speck of light. But that was only the beginning. Racing home, my chest tight with a mixture of fear and excitement, I noticed two dim white lights creeping over the horizon. Something inside me knew they were coming. I burst into the house and practically dragged my mother out of bed. What we witnessed over the next 20 minutes would change our lives forever. They came in waves, 2, then 2 more, then 1. Each craft moved at a crawl, maybe 20 miles per hour, floating no more than 200 feet above us. The silence was the worst part. Something that massive should make noise, should displace air, should do something. But there was nothing except the sound of our own breathing and my mother's whispered prayers. Each one was enormous, easily 200 feet across, with 2 brilliant white lights that had to be 30 or 40 feet in diameter. Between them pulsed a red light, like a mechanical heartbeat. But it was the last one that still haunts my dreams. It came in lower than the others, slower, almost curious. That's when it happened. The sound. Imagine 1,000 digital screams compressed into a single note, then multiply that by 50. It pierced through my skull, resonated in my bones, and brought me to my knees. The craft did it twice, as if to make sure we heard it, as if to say, "We see you seeing us." I broke down crying right there in the driveway, my mother's arms around me, both of us trembling. But they weren't done with me, not by a long shot. A few weeks later, I was back in my driveway, smoking and listening to music on my iPad around 2 a.m. In a moment of what I now recognize as cosmic stupidity, I started playing with the backlight, waving my hand over it to create a strobe effect. That's when I felt it, that sensation of being watched, that makes your skin crawl and your throat close up. I looked up, and there it was, a trapezoidal craft with rounded edges, outlined in pulsating dark red and black energy that looked like flowing electricity. It couldn't have been more than 75 feet above me, close enough that I could see details I wish I couldn't remember. For 15 seconds that felt like 15 years, it hovered there, swaying in a hypnotic pattern like a cobra about to strike. Frozen in place, I managed to raise one hand in a weak wave. The craft's light pattern shifted, and it glided away behind my house. Later, I realized it had probably wanted me to follow it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had. That same craft appeared to me 3 more times across Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, Hoover, and Bessemer. Each time, it seemed to be checking on me, making sure I was still watching, making sure I hadn't forgotten. Then came the dream. Except it wasn't really a dream, was it? I couldn't see or hear anything, but I felt everything. The cold surface beneath me, the rubber-like material between my legs. The next morning, that perfect white ring in the grass, 8 feet wide, mocking me with its geometric precision. My mother mentioned hearing strange noises that night, but we both pretended it was nothing. It's easier that way. But the incident at Shelton State Community College, that's when I realized they weren't just watching anymore. They were putting on a show. A vertical slit of light blue appeared in the sky, like someone had taken a knife to reality itself. White electric currents danced along its edges, and then those things emerged, 25 of them, shooting out one after another, leaving trails of light like cosmic breadcrumbs. When it was over, the slit zipped itself closed with a sound that doesn't exist in nature, and the night was normal again. Except nothing has been normal since that first night in Houston. I've done research since then. I've learned about contactees, people like me who they keep coming back to. Sometimes I wish I'd never looked up at the stars that night as a kid. Sometimes I wish I could forget everything I've seen. But mostly, I wish I knew why they chose me. The orbs still appear regularly, floating, pulsing, dancing their mysterious patterns across the sky. Each time I see one, I wonder if this is the night they'll finally reveal their purpose. If this is the night they'll do more than just watch. I've thought about hypnotherapy, about trying to recover lost memories. But the truth is, I'm terrified of what I might find lurking in those blank spaces in my mind. How many times have they really taken me? What have they done during those missing hours I can't quite account for? Some nights, when I can't sleep, I go outside and look up at the stars. Sometimes I wave, just like I did that night with the trapezoidal craft. I know they're watching. They're always watching. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I swear I can hear that sound again, that digital scream that seems to say, "We remember you too." I've never told this story in its entirety before. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe they won't like it. But I need someone else to know, to understand what's happening to me. Because the lights are getting closer, the visits more frequent, and somehow I know that soon, very soon, they're going to do more than just watch. Last night, I found another ring in my backyard. This time it was bigger, and inside it, pressed into the grass like a message, was a perfect impression of my own hand, waving up at the sky. Redditor 9. I've been putting this off for months now. Every time I try to write it down, my hands start shaking so badly I can barely type. But after what happened to Dad last week, I need to get this out. Maybe someone can make sense of it. Maybe someone's seen the same thing. It started 10 years ago, driving back from Dad's weekend custody visit. I was 15 then, Tommy was 12, and we were in Dad's beat-up Land Rover, heading back to Mom's place through the Douglas Forest stretch. You know that part of Route 43 where the trees crowd in so close they form a tunnel? Where your GPS always glitches out? That's where we saw it. Dad noticed it first. "Boys, look at that," he said, pointing up through the sunroof. His voice had this weird edge to it, not scared exactly, but tense, like when you're trying to stay calm after almost hitting a deer. I remember pressing my face against the glass, and there it was, maybe 60, 70 feet up. This massive, dark gray circle had to be at least 40 feet across, just hanging there. These brilliant white lights ran around its circumference, perfectly spaced like pearls on a string. They didn't pulse or flash like airplane lights, they just were. The weirdest part? The silence. Even with the Land Rover's engine running, you'd expect something that big to make some kind of noise. A hum, a whir, something, but there was nothing. "Dad?" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "What is that?" Dad didn't answer. He'd slowed the car to maybe 20 miles per hour, and I could see his knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. That's when I noticed the details, these square-shaped pipes or tubes running along the bottom and sides of the craft. They looked almost like the cooling pipes you'd see in a factory, but they were arranged in these intricate patterns that made no sense. And the symbols. God, the symbols. They were etched into the metal between the pipes. If it even was metal. These weren't like any writing I'd ever seen. They seemed to shift and change when you weren't looking directly at them. like trying to remember a dream that keeps slipping away. We drove under it slowly, and through the sunroof, I could see the top was shaped like an inverted bowl, lighter gray than the rest. It just stayed there, fixed in place, watching us pass beneath it like an eye. That should have been the end of the story. Just another UFO sighting, right? Something to tell at parties, maybe post on Reddit. But 3 days later, the headaches started. It was Tommy first. He woke up screaming in the middle of the night, claiming he could hear voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. Mom took him to 3 different doctors, but they couldn't find anything wrong. CAT scans, MRIs, all clean. Then Dad started getting nosebleeds, bad ones. He'd be in the middle of a sentence and suddenly blood would just start pouring. Sometimes it would last for hours. The doctors blamed stress, prescribed some medication, and sent him home. I thought I'd gotten lucky. For weeks, nothing happened to me. But then, the dreams began. In every dream, I'm back in that car, looking up through the sunroof, but instead of passing under the craft, it descends. Those white lights start spinning faster and faster, and the symbols begin to glow with this sickly green light. The pipes writhe like snakes, and I realize they're not pipes at all. I always wake up before I see what they really are. But every time I have the dream, I remember a little more. Last month, Tommy disappeared. He'd been getting worse, talking about the voices getting louder, drawing those symbols over and over in his notebooks. The police found his bed empty one morning, the window open. On his wall, he'd carved hundreds of those symbols with his pocket knife. They brought in experts to analyze them, but no one could make sense of them. Dad never stopped trying to figure out what we saw that day. He became obsessed, covering his apartment walls with research about UFO sightings, ancient symbols, missing persons cases. He started talking about patterns, connections, said he was close to understanding something big. A week ago, Mom called to tell me they'd found his car abandoned at that same stretch of Route 43. The driver's seat was covered in blood, but there was no sign of Dad. Just his journal, open to a page filled with those same symbols Tommy had carved into his wall. Here's the thing that really terrifies me. I'm starting to understand them. The symbols, I mean. They appear in my dreams now, and when I wake up, I can almost read them. They're trying to tell me something. Something about why they chose us that day, why they're not done with us yet. The headaches started yesterday, and this morning, my nose started bleeding. I know they're coming for me next. That's why I'm writing this, as a warning maybe, or just to leave some record of what happened to us. If you're driving through Douglas Forest and you see something through your sunroof, don't slow down, don't look up, just drive. Because they're not just watching anymore, they're waiting, and once they choose you, they never let go. Last night I dreamed about those pipes again. But this time, I didn't wake up before I saw what they really were. They were fingers. Thousands of long, jointed fingers reaching down from above. And in the dream, I heard Tommy's voice, clear as day, speaking in that language I couldn't understand before. Now I know what he was saying. They're not just taking people, they're collecting them. And they're almost done. The nosebleed's starting again, worse this time. The symbols are swimming in front of my eyes as I type this, and I can hear something hovering outside my window. The lights are so bright now, so bright, and the voices, if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. Just remember, don't slow down, don't look up, and whatever you do, don't try to understand the symbols. Because once you start to understand them, they understand you too. Douglas, user _witness, account has been inactive for 8 months.